that the people in all the world, the people who are the most evil, really, according to Roy Baumeister, a psychologist, wrote a book called Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty. He says, people who think they're better than they are will be the dangerous ones. Hypersensitive people, who often think their pride is being assaulted, are potentially dangerous. Even when a neutral observer would conclude that no serious provocation occurred, it is still important to recognize that, in the perpetrator's own view, he or she was merely responding to an attack. Evil people don't think they're evil. They think that they're standing for virtue when they hurt people because they don't like what those people are saying. Self-appointed victimhood is actually dangerous. It's actually very, very dangerous stuff. This is true across all political aisles. Idol worship and victimization culture, bad, 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 all the way across. Okay, and the problem is millions of young people now believe this. There's a poll from Pew in November that said of people 18 to 34, 40% of people our age, or I'm 32, so 40% of people in our age group believe that the government should be able to prosecute people for making, quote, statements that are offensive to minority groups. So 40%, 4 out of 10 people our age, would like to repeal the First Amendment. Because it turns out that that's a violation of the First Amendment. So here's the deal. America is the greatest place on the planet because we get to have discussions like this. It's the greatest place on the planet because in a free country, your actions correlate extraordinarily well with your level of success in life. If you want to break that down, all you have to do is keep teaching people that freedom is oppression, that freedom of thought, freedom of speech, diversity of thought, these are all oppressive things that must be stopped in the name of the regime of feelings, and teaching entire generations of kids of particularly minority races that they are victims of an evil white culture, and that evil white culture it's written into the DNA, as President Obama says, and it can never be alleviated. It can never be changed. There is no point at which we say, okay, we've reached utopia, now everybody is responsible for their own actions. Unless people are made individually responsible for their own actions right now, you're giving people an excuse not to be individually responsible for their actions, which means you're giving them an excuse to act like bad human beings. It turns out that living as a free people is actually a relatively simple deal. You just respect other people enough to recognize that they can have different viewpoints. You may think that they're wrong, but you can't do them violence, and to treat them decently. And to treat them decently and to behave in a responsible fashion that makes your likelihood of success better. Your life is in your hands. It's not in the hands of some white privilege out there that's trying to get you. It's not in the hands of the people who hurt your feelings. Your life is in your hands because America is a free country. And anyone who tries to rip away the foundations of that freedom is contributing to the downfall of the greatest country in the history of civilization. Thanks so much. Happy to take your questions.
Form a single line with your questions like down the middle.
Let's start off. Hello. Is it on? Yeah, there's yeah, I'm going to hold it for you.
I follow you and Milo Yiannopoulos on Twitter.
Okay.
So, I wanted to ask, do you think
I would be unfair if I didn't ask whose hair you like better.
Yeah.
The answer is obviously Milo. Right?
Do you think that he is purposely inflammatory to climb the ladder of success, or do you think that he has some merit in what he says sometimes?
Well, I mean, I think both are true. Yes, he's purposely inflammatory to climb the ladder of success, which will tell you himself. And yes, some of what he says has merit. Some of what he says I don't think has merit. You know, today he wrote a piece defending the alt-right, which I thought was terrible. I think the alt-right is a bunch of racist bigots pretending to be free thinkers. I think they're awful people. So, you know, I don't agree with everything Milo says. I think some of what Milo says is good and valuable. And yeah, Milo, I mean, he would freely admit he's a provocateur.
Hello. I have 2 quick questions that are related to each other. You don't like Donald Trump, and I was wondering...
You noticed, yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering...
To be clear, for people who don't know my opinion on Donald Trump, 2 nights ago on Megyn Kelly, I called him a smoking garbage heap of human debris.
I was wondering, if the general election comes down to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, why shouldn't conservatives vote Donald Trump? And if there's no one on the ballot for us, what should we be doing this election?
Okay, so this is a great question, and it's probably the question I get the most now. So I've said that I am a never Trump person, meaning I will not vote for him in a primary, I will not vote for him in a general. The reason for this is because I fully understand the argument. People on the right think that Hillary is guaranteed to be awful, and Trump may or may not be awful, but he'll probably be better than Hillary. Okay, I'm I'm not sure I grant even the premise, because I think that Donald Trump is fully authoritarian, and I think that Donald Trump doesn't think through his policies. I think he does what's politically convenient for him. I think that he's a bad human being who's driven by narcissism and ego, and I think that he is a wild man who will do virtually anything. So I'm not even sure he'd be better than Hillary, which is a lot for me to say, because I think Hillary may in fact be the spawn of Satan. So that's the sulfurous flames surrounding her were my first clue. But I'll grant the premise. Okay, so let's grant the premise for a second. And secondarily, people who think that Trump is going to win against Hillary, this is nonsense. Look at the polls. He's going to get killed. He's going to lose about 350 electoral votes. Ann Coulter made the case today. He's the only one who can win. He'll draw dispossessed white people who didn't show up for Romney. 59% of white people in the United States voted for Mitt Romney. Right now, among white Americans, Donald Trump is polling. His popularity rating among white Americans is 47%. His unpopularity rating is 51%. Among the non-college educated, right, this is his group. He loves the poorly educated. Among the non-college educated white Americans, Donald Trump is running at a 52% negative rating. Right, so Donald Trump's going to get creamed. But let's grant all the premises. Let's say that he turns into a much better president than Hillary Clinton would have been, and he ends up being elected. For some odd reason, you know, the fairy godmother descends from Oz and taps him on the shoulder, and he's the president. So let's say all of that is true. The reason that I will never vote for Donald Trump is because I've spent my entire career fighting for a brand of conservatism that is not racist, that is not sexist, that is not bigoted, a brand of conservatism that is not vulgar and vile to women and to the disabled and to veterans, a brand of conservatism that actually thinks through its positions, isn't reactionary, doesn't believe in authoritarian policies, doesn't believe the President of the United States has the ability to order soldiers to torture people in violation of law. You know, I've fought for a brand of conservatism that isn't conservatism for stupid people. And Donald Trump is not even conservative at all. He's not conservative. And it comes out because the minute he's called on his conservative beliefs, he looks befuddled for a second, like he did on abortion the other night, and then he says the first thing that comes to mind, and 2 minutes later he retracts it. I will not be smeared. So I said in the past, I said back when I spoke in November, that if it came down to Hillary and Trump, I'd vote for Trump. What's changed? A bunch of things. Number one, he refused to disassociate from the KKK on CNN. People say, well, he did it 99 other times. He did it all the time. Okay, if you ask me, do I think rape is bad? And 99 times I go, rape is terrible. And the 100th time I'm like, well, if I do that, what's rape? What are you talking about, rape? I don't know what rape is. If I do that, I'm kind of pro-rape, right? I mean, you don't get to do that. So that was one clue. You know, there are a bunch of indicators up to that point that he was unstable. So I am not going to be smeared with Trump. And Trump is going to smear conservatism. He will be, every time somebody like me gets up and says, when somebody says, the favorite attack of the left is conservatives are bad human beings. We're indecent, right? We're terrible people. This is what the left believes. They believe that it's not just that we're wrong, we're awful. Donald Trump, by justifying every one of those beliefs, smears us for a full generation. So I'd rather lose to Hillary Clinton than be smeared with Trumpism, which is asinine and stupid and vulgar and in many cases vile and evil. I'd rather have Hillary for 4 years and then defeat her in 4 years than be stuck with the brand of Trump for a lifetime. That's why.
Thank you. How's it going? It's my belief that in an ideal world, public figures that make invalid claims, they're deterred by intelligent discussion and political discourse where their claims are found incorrect factually. But we're living in an era, in my belief, that BuzzFeed politics, where people take these easily digestible videos and they form like opinions based off of that.
For sure.
So how do we, like, if you accept that premise, how do we encourage, further research into these topics, like for the generations that refuse to, that want to go off these videos,
right.
Instead of researching?
So the first thing is that we have to create our own videos that are equally as effective. So if you look online, you can find videos of me doing like anywhere between 2 and 5 minute lectures on topics like income inequality. Sure. And I did one about Trump that was about 6 minutes long that was the case against Donald Trump that got, I think, 3 million hits on Facebook, something like that. So there's a way to do it. I think conservatives don't speak the language of young people, and so they don't understand that you can't deliver them pamphlets like Thomas Paine used to do. You actually have to use things called cameras and computers and phones, and these things are cool. So that's number one. Number two is conservatives refuse to talk the language of morality and values. The reason that the left wins, the reason that the socialism is coming back, even though socialism is a disaster, the reason that it's coming back is because for my entire lifetime, what conservatives said about socialism was, what a wonderful idea in theory, but it doesn't work in practice, right? Have you heard this phrase? People say this a lot. They say socialism, maybe it would be great in theory, maybe in a utopia it would be great, but in practice it's inefficient and ineffective and it doesn't work. No, socialism is evil. Socialism is evil. It's an evil idea, and not only doesn't it work, it's evil in practice. Because the bottom line is that, for example, I'll use that as my example because this is the new hot thing among young people, is Bernie Sanders' brand socialism. The way you argue against that is not by saying, yeah, but it's never going to work, or how do you pay for that? Because young people have no concept of how do you pay for that. Their parents are paying for everything. Right? And they have no concept of it doesn't work because when you're 18 you think everything works. So the only way to fight back against that is no, Bernie Sanders' brand of economics is actually evil because you don't get to demand other people's services just because you're there. Socialism is the idea that I'm born and I'm breathing and therefore you owe me stuff. Right? Therefore I get to enslave you. Your labor is mine because I'm here and I'm breathing. Capitalism is the idea that I will starve unless I give you something that I want. That's what capitalism is. It's forced altruism. If I didn't do things for people, I wouldn't get paid. And then I wouldn't be able to pay people in return for services that I want. You have to make the moral argument. So what I would encourage everybody to do is study the morality of the arguments that you make and then argue in moral terms and character terms. And the first thing you have to do there is if the left does come at you primarily with racism, sexism, bigotry, homophobia, you have to say, no, you're just a bad person for calling me these things without evidence. You have to take that argument right off the table in the first 30 seconds or it's a wasted argument.
Sure. Thank you.
Hey Ben, thank you for coming today. Actually, I was sort of answered my question already.
Oh, sorry.
That last one. Hey, no problem. But two questions. One, I actually grew up reading Thomas Sowell. I've heard you mention him a lot. One of my favorite authors. And the first book that I always recommend people was Basic Economics by him. I think it does a great job of simplistic terms of it. And I was wondering, do you have a book that like that you could recommend to anyone?
If you want an even simpler economics book than Basic Economics, there's one called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt that's about 140 pages and is terrific. It really distills the very basics of what you need to know. It's a great economics book.
Awesome.
I mean, anything by Sowell is great. His latest book, actually, I think it's Wealth, Poverty, and Economics. That one is fantastic.
Yeah.
He talks about, the entire book is about the Thomas Piketty argument about why there's income inequality, and he talks about it on a global scale, and it's really quite brilliant.
Yeah,
so, I mean, anybody who wants to, get a reading list from me, you can email me. My email address is bshapiro@dailywire.com. If you have a topic that you want to know more about, I'm happy to recommend books on it.
And so that's like the central argument. So, and then I recently watched a video of yours about the peripheral argument. So, liberals have a great way of talking about the narrative. Mm-hmm. They have a great way of putting up people that, tall, handsome, we put up
image
white
matters.
guys. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So, how do we portray that? I mean, conservatives are so horrible at it.
Yeah.
In really just, especially Republicans.
Well, I think that young people in particular, as the questioner before you said, young people in particular understand that image matters, and we do live in an era of BuzzFeed politics. Older Americans don't seem to understand this. So older Republicans particularly, they don't tend to think about things like image matters, how you dress matters, how you do your makeup matters, how you act in public matters. And they tend to think, well, the idea will conquer all, and that's not true. So I work with groups in Hollywood who try to reach out to folks in politics and try and teach them about these sorts of things. But conservatives suck at it. I mean, they're really, really bad at it. Conservatives, and the case in point is 2008. I mean, Barack Obama comes out, he does his nomination speech on a Greek stage descending from the clouds in front of 60,000 cheering people, and then just speaks gobbledygook. But it doesn't matter what he says, because he looks like a Greek demigod who's about to hurl thunderbolts at you. And John McCain toddles up on the stage, and really toddles. I mean, just kind of walks up onto stage, and he has physical infirmities, so it's unfortunate. But he's hunched over because he was tortured, and he can't raise his arms above his shoulders because he was tortured. And he walks onto stage with a handheld mic. He doesn't even have a lavalier, right? He has a handheld mic, and then they put him up instead of a pantheon or a green screen showing a nice waving flag or something. Instead of any of those nice things, they put him up. And behind him, they put a lime green screen, like he's filming a pornography in the San Fernando Valley. And this is how the Republicans treat their presidential candidates. So imagine how they treat their normal congressional candidates. Yeah, we have to take image seriously. The left does, we don't. Until we do, we're going to lose.
Thank you.
Hi, I think I saw you address this in the Rubin report. Hopefully I'm not mixing it with some other BLM video. But when Obama mentioned how if he had a son, it would be, Trayvon Martin. You try to address something like that.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
If he had a son, it absolutely would not be Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was the son of a broken family who had a criminal history. And President Obama's children are nothing like Trayvon Martin except in terms of race. And they're not of the same income bracket, they're not of the same educational background, they're not of the same family background. They didn't make the same decisions, their parents didn't make the same decisions. To me, there's a strong undertone of racism. And it's like me saying that if I had a kid, he'd be just like a guy living in the mountains of North Carolina. No, he probably wouldn't. I mean, it turns out that not all black people are created in the same situation, and not all white people are created in the same situation. I found that vile. I thought it was terrible. I mean, no, it's fundamentally untrue. And people who believe that it's true, that if Obama had a son, he'd look like Trayvon Martin, either don't know anything about Obama, or don't know anything about Trayvon Martin, or don't know anything about how the world works.
Thank you.
Good evening. I was wondering, I was listening to your podcast a few weeks ago, and you're talking about Bernie Sanders. Why do you think he's struggling with minority vote, and how do you think this is playing a role in his low polling numbers?
So I think that the reason that Sanders is struggling with minority vote is because the Clintons have spent 20 years building up support in minority communities. I mean, the Clintons had a machine, and they used it. I mean, Bill Clinton was the first black president, right, before Obama. That's what he called himself. And so they have. I think the support is unjustified, by the way. Bernie Sanders, he actually marched in the civil rights movement. Like Hillary Clinton didn't do pretty much anything. So it's all smoke and mirrors, I think. But Hillary has also lived in places with heavily minority communities. I mean, she lived in Chicago, and then she lived in Arkansas, and then she lived in New York. Bernie Sanders is in the whitest state in America, Vermont, where a black guy wandered in, they would wonder why. So I think that some minorities look at Bernie Sanders and they say, "Do you even have you ever seen someone like me?" I think also Bernie Sanders, because he's a doctrinaire socialist. I'll give it to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is actually an honest guy. He's not a corrupt harridan like Hillary Clinton. He's actually a deeply wrong believer, a true believer in his ideology. Because he's a socialist first and a racist second, he thinks that socialism is the cure-all for a lot of black folks, whereas Hillary Clinton is willing to go further and pander directly to black folks by saying that they deserve special privileges. Bernie Sanders says it's not black folks deserving special privileges, it's poor folks deserving special privileges. And so that doesn't go over as well as black people need special protection from the federal government in the form of Hillary, in the form of a 90,000-year-old white woman who's never lived outside of a gated community.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for coming out here. My question goes about the precedent that Trump is making in terms of his policies.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to ask you is, he goes a lot about against free markets. He wants to do a lot of things that are more conservative. So how is that going to change the Conservative Party? Because a lot of the people who support him are actually, a lot of people are honest people who always support the Republican Party, and now we got this huge pressure now that might change the party. What is your view on that?
This is one of the reasons why I oppose Trump so strongly, is I think that he's perverting the party from the inside. I've said that Trump is the Hannibal Lecter of conservatism. He's cannibalizing it and then wearing his face around. And that's basically right. Well, on free trade, as anybody who's ever studied economics for more than 5 minutes knows, protectionism is not a recipe for economic success for a country. But Donald Trump is a nationalist populist in the far-right European mold. He's actually like a far-right European leader. He looks a lot like Marine Le Pen in France, for example, or Silvio Berlusconi did back in Italy. Right? He looks more like that than he does like a traditional American Republican. The problem I have with Trump is that, I believe in American exceptionalism because I believe in founding philosophies, which include, by the way, free markets, free trade, free contract, free speech. I believe in all of these things, and I believe this is what makes America great, and this is why I'm a patriot. Donald Trump believes that what makes America great is being in America. Like, America's just great because America's America. And so it wouldn't. Donald Trump really is the simplistic version of my country, right or wrong. And so he believes if you were born in America, then you deserve special privileges, right? This is why he talks, for example, about American jobs. There's no such thing as an American job. There's just a job somebody's willing to work a wage for, that either is here or it's somewhere else. But his suggestion is that he's going to come forward. This, by the way, is why the alt-right has embraced Trump, is because he's basically said that there are all these kind of aggrieved minority groups who have pushed people like President Obama to power, and you white folks have been left behind, and now I'm here to help you. And the way I'm going to help all of you aggrieved white folks who have been put out of business by the evil Chinese and their trade deals and the evil Mexicans and their trade deals. Yeah. By the way, it's so ridiculous when he says that China and Mexico are stumping us on trade. Right, because the Chinese economy is just booming right now after their 2 stock market crashes in 6 months. And if you go down to Mexico, things are just swell. And clearly they're just knocking us out economically. When he says these things, what he's really saying is to disaffected white voters, you've been left behind, I'm here for you, and I'm willing to basically impose an indirect tax on all the rest of the Americans in order to pay your salary to bring these manufacturing jobs back home. I think it's gross, I think it's despicable, and I think it's economically wrongheaded.
Sure, likewise, thank you.
Sir, as you were talking about microaggressions, it reminded me of an article I read. I can't remember too many details, but there were students at a fairly liberal college who needed to go to counseling after seeing the Confederate battle flag on a student's laptop. And I was wondering, do you think that the Confederate battle flag is a racist symbol or rather a sign of heritage and pride?
I mean, I think that for some people it's a racist symbol, and for some people it's a sign of heritage or pride. I mean, I don't think that historically there were a long period of time where it was clearly a racist symbol, and then it became for many people a sign of heritage and pride. So to deny that it's a Confederate battle flag and it had to do with the Confederacy that was preserving slavery would be historically ignorant. To deny that it was also being used and flown above tanks in World War II for people who were just proud of where they were from is also historically ignorant. So, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and one of the things that I object to is the implication that if somebody has a Confederate flag on the back of their truck, then this must be somebody who is an evil racist. Right? That's not true. That person might see it as a sign of heritage. Again, I think that we live in a country where my Twitter feed right now, this minute, if you check it, I'm sure, is filled with people calling me a kike, right? I mean, like right now, this is all the Trump supporters because they're watching this live. So that's in a free country, you're allowed to say what you want and do what you want. I think unlike the Confederate battle flag, I don't think the K word has a lot of different implications. But I do think that it's important for people to recognize that you can see different things in different ways, and that's okay without immediately just getting offended. Like it would have behooved those students to ask the kid, why the Confederate battle flag to me means a symbol of racism and Confederacy. What does it mean to you? Why is it on your laptop? And if the student said it doesn't mean racism to me, it means the flag that flew above my grandfather's tank in World War II to preserve our freedom, then maybe they should say, okay, well, I guess it just means different things to us, and move on with your life. If the greatest obstacle in your life is seeing a flag on the background of somebody's computer, you need more problems.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I have a kind of a conceptual question. So all of those battles kind of ideas are happening right now, and some of the bad ideas are kind of resurrecting, like, I don't know, communism or bring the religion back into the power. So what would be your advice to sort of counteract those ideas, fight those ideas that are inherently idiotic and stupid, and just some people fall for it, some people don't. So what would be your advice for everyone who is listening right now? Like, how do we successfully fight them off?
I mean, so as I say, I think that the arguments usually have 3 levels. The first argument is you have to dispense with the character argument, because people are constantly saying that not communism, not socialism makes you evil. So you immediately say, no, it makes you evil to call me evil based on based on the fact that we disagree, right, or racist, or whatever it is, or you hate the poor. The second argument is your philosophy is wrong, and it's not just wrong, it's morally wrong, and here's why. And then the final argument is your philosophy is also ineffective. Education is the only answer here in the end, but I think it's not education that actually starts on college campuses. Values are inculcated from the time your kid is born. As I say to parents all the time when I'm speaking to, not you guys, when I'm speaking to your parents and grandparents, what I'm constantly saying is, if your kid is not a conservative by the time your kid is 18, your kid will be a leftist by the time they're 21. Because you go to college campus, and what college campuses largely are designed to do is indoctrinate you in a certain way of thinking, and if you're not prepared for it, you don't even know how to handle it. So, educating yourself is the best possible way to do it, and then you have to pick your arguments. I mean, everybody wants to argue with everybody on Facebook. You have to sort of pick your space. You only have so many breaths in your life. Facebook arguments are generally useless. When you're on your deathbed and you're looking back, the time you're going to want back is the time that you were arguing with that crazy guy from the sociology class, and those 2 hours that you spent online when presumably you could have been smoking pot or watching pornography. Also not good uses of your time, but even better than that. The only thing to do is to just educate yourself and know the answers, but that doesn't mean everybody's going to listen. I have a pessimistic view of human nature. I don't think communism is a new idea. I don't think Marx came up with it. There were people living in communes 2,000 years ago. It didn't work then. It didn't work with Marx. It's not going to work 100 years from now when people say, hey, it'd be an awesome idea If we take all of our property, put it together, and then divvy it up, we're just going to keep going through this cycle. We'll go through the cycle. People fall for bad ideas, they're awakened. They'll go through worse ideas, they're awakened. But every time we go through a good cycle, we jump forward in terms of technology and progress about 100 years, and then the left holds us down for 20, and then we jump forward for about 100 years, and then the left holds us down for 20, and that's sort of the cycle of history.
Just clarify. You said educate yourself, but I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about other people.
Well, I'm saying you have to educate yourself to educate others.
Right, and just last question. So, it seems like the anecdotes, personal anecdotes, they trump the research and statistical data. So that's why, for example, hands up, don't shoot is so popular.
Agreed.
But no one knows about what actually happened
right.
with Mike Brown. So, what do you think about this kind of situation
well,
in media and the culture?
Slogans work. I mean, the fact is, people have a really, really short attention span now. Which you've done this question a few times about BuzzFeed politics. That's what it is. I mean, the short attention, hands up, don't shoot, will always win over Michael Brown robbed a convenience store, was pulled over by a cop for walking in the middle of the street, tried to hit the cop in the face, reached through the cop's window, grabbed the cop's gun, fired the cop's gun in the cop's car, tried to run away, turned around when the cop told him to freeze, charged the cop, and was shot to death. It turns out that took longer for me to say than hands up, don't shoot. So because people's attention span is approximately 4 words, hands up, don't shoot fits, and what I said doesn't. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the obligation to fight back against that. And, I think that one way to start, pardon the language, is just to add 2 words at the end of hands up, don't shoot, which is hands up, don't shoot is bullshit. Right? And then you can explain why. You sort of have to start with, this is why this is not true. This narrative is just not true.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, I've been getting a lot of questions from Twitter from people outside waiting. I have this one from Ashley Toth, and she says, what would you propose in order to decrease the national debt and Social Security?
Okay, to decrease, I mean, it's sort of the same question. We were going to have to reform Social Security at some point, obviously. I don't actually believe Social Security is moral. I don't think it's moral for the government for the government to take my money in the expectation that I'm stupid with my money and then never give it back to me, right? Or to tax my grandchildren in order to give it back to me. So we're going to have to fulfill the promises that we've made to the people who are already too old to have a second career. But to people who are younger than that, we're going to have to say to them, I'm sorry you lost your money to the government. Welcome to America where the government sucks. Congratulations, you're now on our side because you realize the government sucks and they're not going to fulfill their obligations. And then you need to say to young people, guess what? Now you're responsible for your own money. I don't know about you guys, but I am perfectly willing to take back 15% of my own money in taxes. I'm self-employed, at least in part, and that means that I have to pay 15% taxes to Social Security. I will never see that money again. Neither will you guys. That money is gone. It's down the toilet. There is no lockbox. All of it's nonsense. Just take that 15% every month, put it in the S&P 500. You'll be fine. So that's where we're going to have to move eventually. The only way to really do that politically is to say to all the people who are older, you're not going to get cut because we made promises that we now have to keep because leftists make stupid promises and right-wingers have to keep them.
I have one quick question, too, from Justin Van Dyke, who's right outside. Do you think a distinction should be made between mainstream Muslim culture and radical Islamist terrorists?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think that there is a difference between Islam as a religion and radical Islam. However, I think that it is also a mistake to pretend that radical Islam is a tiny minority of Muslims. If you look at the viewpoints by Gallup and Pew polls worldwide, a large minority of Muslims believe very, very radical things. Not a large majority of American Muslims, by the way, a large majority of Muslims worldwide. A small minority of Muslims in the United States believe super radical things because many of them are westernized. But if you look at Afghanistan, 99% of people in Afghanistan believe in honor killing. Seriously, this was a Pew poll study. If you look at Iraq, it's the same sort of statistic. If you look at Pakistan, there's a huge number of people who back homicide bombings. So, I think that it's a mistake to pretend that the threat is less than it is. I think it's also a mistake to pretend that Islam as a whole does not have a bigger problem with terrorism than other religions, because statistically it obviously does. But obviously, I have no problem. As a guy who prays 3 times a day toward Jerusalem, I have no right to get on somebody's case for praying 5 times a day toward Mecca. I mean, that's silly.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. I was watching your interview that's on the Rubin Reports on YouTube, and you said that a lot of your beliefs tend to lean more towards libertarian in the sense of, basically the government sucks at pretty much everything, and
yes.
then also basically that, basically that.
Yeah, that's it.
And I was just going to ask, are there instances